Now that we understand the use of polygons, we're going to create a simple interior like this. We'll start with the walls, the floor, and the table. To start this simple interior, we're going to start with a new scene. And we're going to develop a project folder to keep all the content into. I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Project Window. In the project window, I'll click on New, and I'm going to give my project a name. You'll notice that the word New Project is separated by an underscore. This is the only kind of spacing or punctuation that Maya will accept. So what I'll do is I'll select it, and I'll put in my file name, my underscore interior. And then I'm going to search out a location. I'll click on the yellow folder, and I'll go to my desktop. You have to have a folder to put this into, so if you look at the interface for the select location, you'll see a little yellow folder here as well. And in here you can name your project folder. Once you've done that, you'll see that the name of the file down below is where the directory is now pointed towards. I'll simply hit select, and I'm going to hit accepted. Now I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As. I'll go to the desktop, I'll go to the newly generated folder, and in there is a folder named Scenes. And I'll name my scene in there and click on Save As and continue. Now we have a folder in which to keep our project, so if we move it from computer to computer, we won't have broken links from texture maps. We're going to develop the walls and the floor for this. There will be 2 walls and 1 floor surface. And we're going to use the polygons as we have before. But we're going to put in a specific measurement. And we can do that by holding down our space bar, going to create polygon primitives. And if I was to go to the cube, as is with all these other functions, there's a little white box. And if I click on that white box, it will give me the attributes for the geometry that I'd like to create. I'm going to make the width 30 units. I'm going to make the height 0.25, and I'm going to make the depth 30. Now when I click inside my viewport, I get the piece of geometry that I want. Now I can't see the mesh underneath anymore. So I'm going to zoom back. And if you were to look at your keyboards, you'll see that if you hit the number 4 on the keyboard, it will give you a wireframe of your geometry. 5 is what you had by default when you created it. So if I were to hit 4 and then hit R on the keyboard, I can now scale that down to fit my grid. I'm immediately going to save my file by hitting Command S. Now I'll hit 5, and I can see there is my floor surface. Now we want 2 walls that are adjacent to each other. So I'm going to hit W on the keyboard, and I'm going to duplicate this surface twice. First I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm going to rotate that so it's vertical like a wall. I'll hit E on the keyboard. Now if I go to my channel box, I can put in specific numbers here. So if I wanted to, I could start to rotate it by hand, and as I do, I can see it updating in the channel window. I can see that if I were to punch in 90 degrees, it will give me a vertical wall. Now I want this to be against this edge of the floor, and I want this edge of this polygon to be there as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to tap the space bar to go to the 4 views. And I'm going to zoom back on the front view. I'm going to put my cursor over the front view and then tap it so that that is the only view that is filling my screen. And if I hold the Option key and with the right mouse drag up, I can zoom out. I'll now hit W on the keyboard. I'll drag it over to the edge, and then I'll drag it on the y-axis up so it's against the edge of that polygon floor surface. If I were to return to my 4 views and look at my perspective view, that's pretty much what I wanted. Usually the floor is not as high as the floor is wide, so I'm going to scale that down. Now, I could scale it by hitting R on the keyboard, but if I were to hit R on the keyboard and drag on the x-axis, it scales in both directions. So the other alternative would be to go to right-click, choose Vertex, and I'll go to my perspective view and I'll turn this a little bit. And I'll marquee select all the way across the top edge of my polygon, and I'll hit W to get my move tool, and then I'll pull that down to make it a little bit more believable. Now there's no exact measurement for this. This function is just to acquaint you with the software. I'm going to return to my object mode. Now I need another wall over here. So once again I'll hit Command D to duplicate, and I'm going to rotate it on the y-axis. In this case, my y-axis is represented by X. So I'm going to rotate it on that axis, and over here I'll put in 90 degrees to be specific. Now once again I want that to be over along this edge, so I'll hit W on the keyboard and I'll start to move this out. Now if I were to go to my top view and I would hit 4 on the keyboard, I could see much better what's going on, and I can simply drag it into position here like so. If I was to go to my perspective view now, I've got 2 walls and a floor. I'm going to hit Command S to save. Now that we have the walls and the floor, we're going to make a table in the middle of the room. We're going to use a bit of a cheat here because we've already got a surface horizontally placed, and we know how to duplicate that. So all we need to do is hit Command D to duplicate the floor surface, pull it up a bit, and then hit R on the keyboard to scale it down to the proportions that we may want. It's pretty subjective at this point. There's my tabletop, and there it is in the middle of the room. Next, we're going to make the legs. Now, we're going to make the legs by introducing a new polygon. So I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, and I'll click in the middle of my interior. And what I've just done is I've created yet another floor surface, and that's not quite what I want. So I'm going to hit Delete on the keyboard, and I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, and I'm going to go to the attributes again by clicking on that little open white box. And in the upper right corner, I'm going to click on Reset Tool, and then I'll click inside my interior. Now I'm going to start by going to my orthographic views for this. And this is where that 4 on the keyboard comes in handy because I can see through it. At this point, it's pretty subjective on the thickness of the leg you want to make. So I'm going to zoom in on it using the right mouse and the Option key, and the Option key and the middle mouse to move around in the viewport. And I'm going to hit R to scale. I'm going to scale this completely down to perhaps the thickness of a leg of a table. So now I have this small cube that is just below the table itself. I'm going to return to my orthographic view, and I'm going to select that cube, right click and choose Vertex again. I'll marquee select the bottom 4 vertices, and I'll drag them down to the floor. I'll return to my object mode by right clicking on the geometry and choosing object mode, and I'll hit Command S to save. Now we need 3 other legs, and we want to position them. I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to zoom in on the tabletop bit. Here's my tabletop, here's my floor, here's the leg of the table. I'm going to place it maybe about here. I'll hit Command D and then on the z-axis I'll drag it over to the other side and put it roughly in the same spot. I'm going to come back and shift select the first leg. And if I were to hit Command D, it duplicates both of those because they've been selected together, and I can move those over to the other side. And I'll hit Command S to save. So if I were to return to my perspective view, there is the beginnings of my table. Now, I'm going to go to the Channels window as well. You can reach the Channels box or Channels window by clicking on the tab that would appear at the top or on the side. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign these elements to their own layers. You'll notice down at the bottom of that channel box there is a thing called Layers, Options, and then Help. There are a series of blue and white icons. If I were to select by shifting and selecting the walls and the floor, I can now go to the bottom of the channel box, and the icon furthest to the right, which is a little blue sphere on a white plane, and I were to click on that, it assigns them to a separate layer. As in Photoshop, I can double click on that and I can name it. I'll name it Walls Floor, and I'll click on Save. And if I were to click on the V now, I can turn that on and off. That would allow me to work on an individual element without a distraction by other pieces of geometry that might be blocking my view as I work. Let's assign the table to its own layer as well. I'm going to marquee select the four legs on the tabletop, and once again I'll click on the white plane with the blue ball on it down at the bottom where the layer window is, and I'm going to double click on layer 1 and I'll name it Table. I'll hit Save, and once again if I want to I could turn it on or off.